Welcome everybody to the Law and Use series of interviews for Law Week 2020. Great to have you with us. And today we're going to talk about human rights and equal opportunity with the Victorian Commissioner. But let me first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are having this discussion and wherever you may watch and listen to the content. Important to take this opportunity to remember the millennia through which this land has been shepherded and to acknowledge the contributions of elders past, present and emerging. Kristen Hilton is the Victorian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commissioner, although I think I've got that round the wrong way, so apologies. Kristen, great to have you with us for this conversation.
Thanks very much, Lynne. Happy to join you.
So tell me a little bit, for those people who aren't familiar with the way in which the Commission operates, give us a quick thumbnail sketch of the work.
Sure. Well, the Commission is based here in Melbourne, but it has a mandate across Victoria. And primarily it's there to uphold laws and individuals' rights in relation to equal opportunity and human rights. And we have three main laws that we operate under that sort of guide us in our work. That is the Equal Opportunity Act, which has been around in Victoria for nearly 40 years. It's gone through a series of amendments. And that protects individuals from discrimination, whether that's direct or indirect discrimination, which essentially amounts to unfavourable treatment as a result of a particular attribute. So whether that is a disability, whether that's someone's gender, whether that's someone's race or someone's age. And people can come to us and make complaints based on discrimination, and we will try to resolve those. We also have education functions whereby we train employers, public sector and businesses about what their obligations are under equal opportunity law. We also have the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities here in Victoria, which is, I think, important now more than ever. And that also places obligations on public authorities, so the police, the government, all sorts of government departments, around how to protect and uphold people's individual rights and when they can or can't be limited. And we also have a mandate under the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, which is there to protect people from religious or racial vilification. And under all those acts, as I said, under the Equal Opportunity Act, we have a complaints function. We also have investigation, research and advocacy functions.
I can imagine there's a lot of interplay at the moment between those various functions that you have. What are you seeing? I mean, early in the piece, there were some horrifying instances of racial discrimination and very overt castigation of people, particularly of Asian appearance. Has that sustained?
Yeah, that's continuing, and it's really been, we've seen a significant increase in the number of formal complaints and also inquiries, just people reporting it to us. And the nature of those incidences have sort of changed as well. So often we will take complaints of racial discrimination in the workplace or in relation to goods and services, but more and more we're seeing vilification that happens in public. So someone might be on public transport, and there was this terrible case recently of a health worker catching the train to his job. He's an essential worker. He's a person of East Asian appearance, and he was racially abused on public transport to the extent that he felt physically threatened, had to get off at the station before work, and now has to have his son drive him to work because he doesn't have a license. So, and unfortunately that's not an isolated incident. We're hearing similar stories really across Victoria. And last year, as a result of a Reducing Racism initiative, we developed a community reporting tool, which is now hosted by about 16 councils throughout Victoria, and people can jump online and actually just report an incident. And sometimes that's all that people want to do. And it can be sometimes quite difficult actually to get any more resolution because they might not know who the perpetrator of the incident was. But that information is really important to us because we can then see where and how it's happening in the community and talk to other agencies and also talk to government about the type of interventions or strategies that we need to develop to combat it.
So even if it's not about, you know, bringing a particular individual perpetrator to justice, it's worth
Yes.
reporting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we try to make it as simple as possible for people to be able to do that. And certainly, again, since COVID-19, we've seen the number of reports that are coming through on that community reporting tool increase by 100%. And 90% of them are related to incidents of racial discrimination or vilification.
And how do you do it?
So you can also go online to our website. So if you jump onto our website, and the links are there fairly clearly, it basically gives you a form and a few questions to answer, and you can just tell your story about what's happened. And if you do want us to contact you and follow it up, then you just tick the box. But if you don't want any more contact, then we can just use that report in an anonymous way to track what's happening and, as I said, work out what the best responses are going to be.
So we'll put the details up that would be great at the end of this conversation. But I can imagine there are other instances too where the pressures around employment and housing particularly have had a bearing on people's treatment, and that may well be, you know, coming to you through equal opportunity or other avenues. What are you hearing on that front?
Yes, it is. And increasingly we're seeing people call about their work conditions, what employers can lawfully do during COVID-19. We saw quite early on, before I think everyone went into lockdown and a number of people were remote working, about the types of tests that some employers wanted to do to see if people were potentially infectious or had the disease. So there was some sort of unusual things happening, and I think that's mostly stopped now. But we're seeing people, you know, who are being stood down or have had their hours significantly reduced. And this is particularly the case for women who are trying to juggle, I think, more caring responsibilities than ever before, and also trying to work in a way that perhaps their employer expects them still to do. Now, in the public sector, for example, public sector employers get 20 days of special leave if they're caring for school-aged children. That's not necessarily applying in the private sector.
Kristen, you also mentioned the proportionality, if you like, of constraints and restraints at this time. And we've seen, you know, that certainly there are police on the beat who are fining people and making sure that we are maintaining appropriate distance and doing, you know, what has been asked of them. But there is also judgment to be imposed there in terms of how severely you respond or the police respond to certain circumstances. Are you getting concerns raised with you about how that's being rolled out?
We are, and particularly in the early days when these fines, and you know, they're significant fines. They're upwards of $1,600. And what I would say about that is that I think that most Victorians, the large majority of Victorians, certainly accept that there are extraordinary limitations being placed on their freedom of movement and the way in which they conduct their lives at the moment. And they understand the overriding public health imperative that's guiding those decisions. And this is where one of the laws that we have here in Victoria becomes really important, and that's the Charter. Because the Charter says when you are placing restrictions on people's movement or on their privacy or their right to education or other rights that are found within the Charter, those limitations have to be proportionate, they have to be time-bound, they can't go on forever, and they have to be the least restrictive approach that you can take at any one time. So, you know, I think we find ourselves in this extraordinary situation, and we understand that extraordinary laws and powers are being given to public authorities, and the government has recently passed legislation which gives sort of very unusual powers to government to make decisions about certain things. And our view is that they are appropriate as long as there is good transparency around how those laws are being rolled out, and as long as there is confidence around the fact that, yes, this is the least restrictive way in which we can keep you safe, and we are taking a whole range of rights into considerations when we're making these laws and policies. And if you take the example of the enforcement regime that's being conducted by Victoria Police, I think we saw pretty early on that there were a number of sort of egregious examples where perhaps discretion could have been used much, much more wisely around the issuing of a fine. And look, we were quite vocal about the fact that some fines shouldn't have been issued, as were a number of other community groups. And that, I think, has led to the police placing more scrutiny around when and how fines will be issued, and making sure that officers are much more careful, I think, in the issuing of fines. The last thing that we want to happen as a result of COVID-19 is that we see a criminalisation of a health pandemic. The last thing that we want to see is particularly vulnerable people, people who are homeless, people who are fleeing domestic violence, people who speak English as a second language and perhaps don't understand the nuances of some of the messages that are being come out, that they're copping a $1,600 fine because it's difficult for them to comply or because they can't comply. What we need in that instance is to police to play that community safety or referral role and assist, rather than, I think, further penalising someone for the circumstances that they find themselves in.
So to wrap things up, Kristen, clearly there are a number of perspectives here around discrimination and equal opportunity and the work of the Charter. If people were to want to contact you or to find out whether or not something that's happening in their world fits in your brief, is the website the best option?
The website, also you can call us. So the number is 1300 891 848, and we can put up some more information about that. And also the community reporting tool, as I mentioned, if people want to report various incidents that they have experienced or that they've seen, it doesn't have to be something that's happened to them. It might have been something that they saw happen to somebody else. The other thing that I can mention, Lynne, is that we will be launching a hub on our website that is tracking some of the limitations on people's rights that have been imposed as a result either of policy or legislation, more just so that we can understand actually what the policy levers has been and how it's impacted upon charter rights. So there'll be some good information there on the website, and people can jump online and certainly just email us or contact us through those mediums if they're worried about anything that they've seen.
Thank you again for your time and for being part of Law Week this year.
Thanks so much, Lynne.
Kristen Hilton, who joins us as the Victorian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commissioner for the Law and News series for Law Week 2020.